Hello, and welcome to What Democracy Looks Like in the Podcast, hosted by me, Mary Layton. This is the kitchen sink version of political podcasts where ordinary voters from around the world try to explain how democracy and voting work in their country. Today, for the very last episode of this season, we are looking at democracy in the United States. You're about to hear an interview I recorded in mid-December 2024 with Nicola Sharratt, a dual US and British citizen who will be providing both the comparative and the on-the-ground perspective we look for in this podcast. Nicola was also a guest on my very first pilot episode talking about the United Kingdom back in 2022, so I'm really excited to have her back again to round off the end of the series. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, share, or go to the website www.democracyinpodcast.com to find out more. And now let's go find out what democracy looks like in the United States. Okay, well, I'll start like I did last time by why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Nicola Sharratt. I am a dual US UK citizen. I have been my entire life by pure luck, circumstance of birth. And I live in Atlanta, in Georgia. I've lived here for 10.5 years.
Long time
Prior to that, I lived in New York. Prior to that, I lived in Chicago. I am an academic, specifically an archaeologist and an anthropologist.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach at a large public university in Georgia.
Fantastic, thank you. And you were on my pilot episode.
I was.
Talking about the UK. So thank you so much for coming back again and talking about the US. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about what democracy looks like in the US. And that's pretty exciting. Of course, this is December 2024. So we are just a month out from the US presidential election where Trump won. Were you surprised by that? Did it come as a shock to you?
That's actually a harder question than it should be.
I know, right?
It depends on which part of me you're asking.
Interesting. Tell me.
So I think maybe it's just I'm a natural pessimist, I'm not sure, but I did have a fear.
Yeah.
Right, because that's how I feel about this, right? I was worried for a long time.
Yeah.
I had, I think, as many other people maybe did, like some optimism when Kamala was the new nominee for a brief period. And there was also a part of me that just could not believe people would make this choice.
Right.
Again. So on one level, my sort of rational, pessimistic doomsayer side is not surprised.
Right. Yeah.
My other, I want to believe better in humanity.
Yeah.
And I thought humanity would make what to me is a better choice.
Yeah.
That side is sort of shocked.
Yeah, it's been a weird kind of reaction this time around. It's almost like muted. It's all
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
I don't know how collectively or individually to have the energy
to process it. Yeah.
And to deal with what's coming.
Exactly. I think that's that kind of sums. I was definitely not as I don't want to say invested for somebody who runs a podcast on democracy. I was like, it was hard to be. Yeah. It's a weird kind of response. Muted feels a little bit like fatigued almost.
Fatigued, I think, is a very good description.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested. So today we're going to talk about, I still, even though this is about the US, and what a lot of the podcast has been doing is comparing different countries to the US, I still want to think about describing how democracy works in the US today a little bit like from an outsider's perspective, because both you and I did originally grow up in the UK, and even though we are both now naturalized, well, I'm a naturalized US citizen, you've always been a dual citizen. So let's start off by thinking about, like we always do, like the basic structure of let's explain how the US democratic system works. So I know there's three, people always describe it as being three different levels of government. It's three, right? It's not four.
Different branches.
Different branches. Right. Okay, that's the word. Okay. Yes. So what are the three? Do you understand what that means? Like I had
This
to
is
pass a
really,
test. I had to pass
yeah,
a
you had to
test,
take the test. I have never had to take the test.
and I still don't
Um,
understand what it means.
so my understanding is the executive, which is the presidency,
Okay.
the legislative, which is both houses of Congress, and the judicial,
Okay.
which is the court system.
Right.
And of course, my understanding at least is that how if we understand it at the federal level, so we would be
Uh-huh.
talking about, yeah, presidency, White House, we would be talking about the houses of Congress, and then of course we would be talking about the Supreme Court and all the levels of federal court system beneath that. What I think is very interesting about the
Mm.
US system is how many other much more localized
Okay.
levels of government there are. Um, that, you then have kind of a version of that system within each
Mm.
state, right? So then you
Right.
have your executive with the governor, you have your legislative
Right.
with your state house, um, and then you have your judicial state court system as
All the way
well.
down. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, this is not directly why it is part of democracy. I am always fascinated by how
Mm.
many different police there are in this
Oh, interesting.
country,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how my understanding of that is about an intended diffusion of power.
Interesting.
As somebody who's grown up somewhere where the police are one entity, even though
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
organized to some degree locally, I can never quite wrap my head around the fact that there
Right.
are state police, city police. There's the police in the city I live in, which is just south of Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
city in Atlanta. There's the university police who actually do
Right.
have a degree of authority, unlike those kind of symbolic sort of police we had at
Yeah.
Cambridge, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the complexity of both government here
That's a
and
really good point.
also the power of government, like in literally
Mm.
the who violence of the state is
Yeah. Yeah.
vested in has
Yeah.
always, yeah, even after 20 years here, I don't fully understand it.
That's a really, really good point, actually. I like the way you pointed out, as in like all the different types of police. There's so many different layers. I mean, it's kind of obvious to point out that there's that contrast between the federal and the state level, which is always very, very confusing to me. And I don't think I will ever be able to quite wrap my head around how people switch between those two, like what exactly the difference is and how like I people explain it to me and I can never quite understand the both symbolically and practically the difference between federal and state powers, but everything else as well. Right, yeah, there's so many different police
There's so
forces.
many different levels. And then, city government, right? And
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
again, I lived in Atlanta for a long time and I work in Atlanta, and now I
Mm.
live in a city of maybe 30,000, I think.
Mhm.
That's,
Mhm.
I mean, it borders Atlanta, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so we have our own like mayor and
Yeah.
council.
Yeah.
And this is the first time in years, in decades, that I have
Yeah.
lived in a smaller city. And so the way local
Yes.
politics plays out has been really interesting to me in the
Interesting.
last
Yeah.
few years because it's so immediate
Uh-huh.
and people are so often even more, I think, invested in it. And
Interesting.
yeah, there seems to be never-ending drama in my local city council. And the council government is maybe it's 2 blocks from my house.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think the sense of all the different layers, which I understand like philosophically this
Mhm.
sort of
Mhm.
division in a federal system. Yeah, this is probably beyond this conversation, Mary,
No,
but
tell me. Yeah,
the
yeah.
more that I have been teaching heritage and archaeology
Mhm. Mhm.
primarily to graduate students who are going into cultural resource management, so who
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
going to do archaeology compliance, right? So the
Yeah.
more I'm teaching things about, say, NAGPRA, Native American Grace Repatriation and Protection
Yes.
Act,
Yeah.
right? The more my previously very limited understanding of, say, sovereignty of tribal
Interesting.
authority is
Yeah.
really, so there's that whole level too.
Of that kind of authority and law and yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Is getting because that's a whole other level of power
Mm-hmm.
and authority and like the sovereignty aspect of law within the US as well, which is a whole different
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. Yeah,
This
yeah.
just came up actually in a conversation, Mary, as you know, I
Hmm.
work as an election worker, and I
Yes.
happened to be just hanging out with two of the friends who I do that with, like we were
Hmm.
friends prior.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation about all the different forms of identification that a voter can present,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I had not thought about because we were going through just talking about it's a huge list actually in Georgia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and one of them is a tribal ID, which
Yes.
I found really interesting, and I hadn't thought about it before, maybe because no one's ever handed me one to
Yeah.
use. But I was really struck by that because again, I don't personally know who issues tribal IDs, but I found it
Yes.
really interesting that one of the forms of identification you can use to vote in federal elections
Yes.
is an ID issued by, or at least representative of another form of sovereign
Yes.
authority. So
A sovereign nation.
I'm
Yes.
really fascinated by. I was just thinking about this yesterday. I'm really fascinated by that right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's really different. It's very different forms of sovereign power versus state power versus
hmm
federal power, all layered on top of each
all these
other.
different layers. Yeah.
And I guess most people in the United States are not even aware that there's a sovereign power that exists in the same space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I despite teaching some of the legislation that interact, around these issues,
Yeah.
it's been some of my students have had to keep pointing that fact out that
Fascinating. Well,
tribes are
I have to
sovereign
say, I
authorities.
only know about it because I took Jessica Catalino's classes on on this back when I was an anthropologist in my first couple of years of graduate studies in University of Chicago. So shout out to
Most
Jessica
people
Catalino.
wouldn't know. Yeah. So yeah, I found that really interesting. I was just, as I said, just thinking about this question
Yeah.
yesterday. So
And
yeah.
if anyone's listening to this podcast and is interested in this topic, you should look out for anthropologist Jessica Catalino's fascinating books on this topic. So shout out to her. Um, anyway, so uh, this idea of all these different layers of power and all these different layers of government. I'm interested that what you said was when you get down to the nitty gritty, the really local layer, that's when it gets really, really dramatic. And in a sense, that makes sense because that's the one that's most closely related to people's day to day life. And I wonder if also that's the one they feel they have most say over. And is most closely related to most closely related to stuff that really matters to them, like are the streetlights working at the end of my street, but also the one they feel they have most ability to make any change about, maybe.
Yeah, I think quite possibly. That I mean, I think there's also just this proximity of, you know them, right? My council person
Right.
lives on the street behind my street. I see
Yes.
him walking his dogs.
Yeah.
Um, I can run into him on the street and ask him a question.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've been surprised by how contentious local politics
Yeah.
seems to be here. And again, it's just so long since I've lived somewhere
Yeah.
this size that but it seems to be deeply. And what's interesting is also this is a city where, those people when they stand for elections locally, I don't know how
Mm.
much this extends to other small cities. They don't run on a partisan platform. They're not
Right.
running, nor is the mayor.
Yes.
My guess is every single one of the 8 council members and the mayor, my guess would
Mm.
be that they would identify and vote at higher levels for Democrats.
Right. So at that level, it doesn't matter. It's about you. I
Yeah.
also now live in a small town on the edge of Chicago, right? And I think that tracks a lot, right? And I wonder if in local cities it tracks on the alderman level. Like thinking of Chicago, we in our small local town, it turns out, I mean, I'm laughing, but it's awful. And I think this actually comes a lot to, I've talked a lot on the podcast about corruption and the laughing, but it's awful is kind of like often the attitude. We've discovered that the school district, it turns out, has a hole of several $1 million because the person who is in charge of the school district seems to have accidentally lost several $1 million while also running up several large personal credit cards. And basically, the person who ran the school district for several years turned out to have run off with rather a lot of money, while also hiring relatives to have key positions. Incredible corruption scandal, which has now put the
Hmm.
entire school district in an enormous, great big threat of bankruptcy. And this is in like a really small town, in a town that was
Hmm.
previously known for having an amazing school district that people used to move into.
Is that an elected position?
Actually, I'm not sure if it's elected or appointed. I think it's appointed. Um, and it's one of those things where it's becoming, as you can imagine, extremely dramatic, very, very heated. But that's the level both of the drama of local politics and also this indication of it's corruption the whole way down, right? And you're
Hmm.
thinking,
Yeah.
how can someone get away for several years of absolutely robbing the local school district? Then you're like, how does this happen? And I think a lot about. I mean, I think this is going to come up a lot today, of like how does people's response to these kind of corruption scandals in the US at both the national level
Hmm.
and all the way down to the very, very local level. If we look at things like people's response to Trump, utterly, utterly corrupt in the most brazen way. But then we look at things like Biden pardoning his son.
Hmm.
I've been thinking a lot recently about why the Democrats lost this election and all of these ideas of like, well, um, a little bit of corruption is okay.
Mm.
A little bit of like, well, it's okay if we do it just a little bit because look how bad the other guy is. Like, it's fine for us to pardon our kids because look how bad they are, right? It's fine for the Clintons to be a little bit corrupt because look how bad Trump is. Like, there's a certain level of corruption that's considered acceptable on the every single level as long as you're polite about it. Like
Mm.
campaign donations are perfectly acceptable. They're not bribes, right? Because they're
Mm.
polite white collar corruption.
Hmm.
But when you get to the level of what's his name, Elon Musk,
Hmm.
like all the headlines right now that come out in the last couple of days of his enormous campaign donations to Trump, well, that's going too far, right? There's like what is considered an acceptable level of corruption and what's considered an unacceptable level of corruption at every scale of the. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I wonder if that makes any sense to you.
Well, I'm really intrigued by that the point about the campaign donations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I hear you entirely that, you can read them and those can be understood
Mm,
as a sort of micro form of corruption, right?
right.
But I also wonder if there's something bigger about the role of money in this
Yes.
society, right? The
Oh,
expectation here
totally.
is that you just pay for everything,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You pay for medical care. You know,
Right.
you don't get maternity leave, right? You have to
Yeah.
pay for everything here.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
And so of course you would.
Pay for an election.
Hmm.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Because the amount of money in elections is also
Hmm.
startling coming from outside. Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I would like to, part of it I find difficult, but I don't remember what year that Supreme Court ruling was,
Right.
the one that, basically led unfettered amounts of money into US elections. And I know it's within my time living in this country, but I don't have a good memory of elections without all that money
Right, right,
in
right.
them here.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And what it looked like before. I've spoken to I'm a therapist now and working with clients over this last election has been very, very interesting because it's meant that I've talked to people in the lead up to the election, in the immediate aftermath, from quite a large cross section of society, and got lots of really interesting responses. And I've also been I've been very curious going online, looking at both, normal, the kind of responses that chime with my own political views, but also actively seeking out things like Reddit conservative discussion boards to try and understand other people's responses to the election and reasons why they voted the same way they did. And one thing that's been a theme that I've really seen is I've been looking specifically for either why did people not vote? And over again, I kept seeing exactly the same response from people of I didn't vote because neither candidate offered anything to me. Like they're both as bad as each other, or both of them are corrupt. Both of them offer nothing for me. Like, why should I vote for either of them? Why should I vote for somebody who's not offering me anything? I.e., the Democrats are not offering me anything either. And I find that position really, really fascinating because somebody like me looks at somebody like Trump and says, well, I don't really like the Democrats offering, but Trump is worse, therefore I'm going to hold my nose and vote for the Democrats. But many, many people see that as kind of an insult and say, why should I vote for somebody I don't like actively just because the other person is worse? And I can't do that myself, but I see it as I can see the ethics of that, which I think is really interesting. It's like, why should I vote for a little bit of corruption and somebody who's bad just because the other one is terrible? So yeah.
I can see the logic.
Yes.
I have found my response to honestly the last few weeks, and I think I will move past it, but I actually don't care why
Right.
people made a different choice
Yeah.
because ultimately I think there is such a clear line that
Mm.
one candidate
Oh yeah, totally.
previously was in office and put babies in cages.
Oh, I totally. I.
You know, and so that what I found is really interesting in
Yeah.
myself because normally I would be really interested in
Okay,
that
I see.
question
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
why. And this is just a step too far.
It's a step. Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. I get you. No, I understand. I
I've
understand.
just been surprised in my own sort of absolutist response this
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
A, I'm despondent, and B, I don't really care
Fair enough. Fair enough.
because the choice to the act and it maybe my feelings about people who didn't vote are different, but I'm not sure quite where I would articulate those. But this was just this is my point where I started about my faith in humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is I think people I have a lot less faith in humanity.
Well, it's for me. It's been trying to understand how could people vote for him, like, and it's I went on these conservative discussion boards the day afterwards, and there were literally threads of people saying, my neighbors are not talking to me, and my neighbors are calling me like women haters and traitors. I don't understand what they're talking about. What are they talking about? And and it was fascinating seeing people being like completely confused and having other conservatives explaining to them, hey, there's this thing about abortion, and then being, what? And that to me is really, really interesting and says a lot about like the whole political landscape of like what do people think they're voting for when they're voting in these elections. I think maybe it comes back to what we're saying about the local versus the federal. You can be really, really invested in your local politics and know nothing about the federal level other than it seems like a game.
So I realized, and actually, Mary, you are the person who would understand this. Probably, I've tried
Yeah.
to describe this what I realization to other people, but you will get it. I think that it's not a game; it's a pantomime. And I think
Interesting.
that the absence of
Fascinating.
pantomime as a form
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that, I think, is what
That's so
that
interesting.
campaign has served as, is that form of really over the top
Yeah.
performance art, right?
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah.
is consumed as entertainment,
Yeah. Yeah.
which to
Yeah.
your point about then people not really perhaps having taken, and I, understand this, right? People not having necessarily taken the time to like read manifestos, right? Whatever they're called here.
Well,
Because
Trump. Yeah.
there's a different way, and you didn't have one to be fair, apart from 2025, right?
Well,
So
lots of the people defending him on these discussion boards I'm reading are saying, like, well, obviously he's satire. When he says these things, it's obviously satire. He doesn't actually mean it. Like that's their defense. It's like, well, when he says he's gonna do XYZ, when he says he's gonna put tariffs on Canada, obviously that's satire. Like all of these idiots who are believing that, like, the joke's on them. I'm like, well, but like, and they keep saying, well, look, they can't take a joke, like, and it's like, but what if it's not a joke?
Remember last time? This is what I can't get by with the like he doesn't do it because we saw it,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly, exactly,
We saw
exactly.
it.
And also the pantomime dame, the one person who's joking, is not representative of the whole system. I think this kind of gets back to, sorry, I'm kind of going off script of some of my
No,
questions.
no,
Also of
it's
like, who do we vote for? Do we vote for one person or do we vote for a party?
mhm.
And I think that kind of gets to your point about it's pantomime. In the presidential elections, there's always this really slippery thing about like, who are you voting for? Are you voting for one person or are you voting for a party? Like, you put forward this one figurehead of like, oh, you're voting for Trump, but actually you're voting for a whole system. You're voting for the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is more than one person, right? You're voting for Project 2025. You're voting for a whole philosophy in a sense.
This is where I think, and I don't know them because I'm not like a political scientist, but I think that this is actually where the breakdowns of when people look at,
Mm,
X number of percentage of voters voted this way in the presidential race, but then they voted this way
yeah.
in their congressional, that I think is where it gets really interesting. And obviously, in the UK,
Mm.
we also had an election this year, which I
Right.
also voted in, and
Right.
which I was also sort of ambivalent about the
Hmm.
leading competition
Yeah.
to the party in power. But in some way, because you aren't voting directly for the leader,
Yes, exactly.
about whom I feel particular ambivalence in the UK context.
Hmm.
I
You
mean,
mean
again,
you're not excited about Starmer?
so no, not particularly. And actually, my MP has been quite controversial in a lot of ways. Rosie
Yeah.
Duffield is the MP
Okay.
in
Yeah.
Canterbury, right? So, but there is a different experience, and I had lots of conversations with family members about would they vote Labour, would they vote Green, and making different choices.
Mm,
So, but I think
mm.
there is something different about voting for the individual. It
Yeah.
does affect
Yeah.
one's emotional response.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I was actually just learning about the system in Ireland where they have ranked voting.
Mhm.
And that sounded really fascinating. Ireland just had an election last week, and apparently it takes a very, very long time to count. But that does end up with an extremely different system where you can have ballot papers that look wild because you can have people voting really different parties the whole way down. Um,
And I think that was on the ballot in various states.
right.
But it was rejected overwhelmingly, is my understanding. It wasn't on the ballot here where I vote, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
seem to. I was just listening to NPR or something. I was just listening to a news story yesterday that was about this. That despite people's dissatisfaction with the system as it stands, when given an option to change the system, but it's a complicated system. I did an AS in politics, so I do remember having to
Yeah.
sit down and understand all these different voting systems, and it is quite hard to wrap your head around. So I sort of understand why people might not choose for us to have it
I
instead,
th-
but
I think changing any system, any electoral system, is always extremely difficult because it's hard for people. That's partly why I ended up starting this podcast. It's really, really difficult to imagine other ways and what it would look like. And once you have something, I mean, think especially in the US, just when we think about the Constitution, like as we've talked about, other countries in the Americas and around the world have changed their constitutions quite regularly. But in the US, the constitution here is a semi religious document, and the idea of ever changing it is considered absolutely sacrilegious. Um, and that's rather problematic. Yeah.
yeah, it's illustrative. Sorry, this is just maybe not helpful, but
No,
the
go for it.
day after the election this
Uh huh.
year, just in terms of what is considered acceptable and some of those rulings on the Constitution.
Mm hmm. Mm
So
hmm.
I live in a state with among the most lax gun laws in the
Interesting.
country.
Yeah.
You can carry a gun into my classroom.
Oh gosh.
And for some reason, my institution had decided to host their active shooter training the day after this election,
Oh my
which I
God.
still don't understand. It
Yeah.
was
Someone didn't
in-house
think that
training.
through.
Someone didn't think it through. But though the sense of like just having had this election and then having to, or not having to, taking this training because
Yeah.
the way politics works in this country means that that is a very real threat
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it comes back to the money thing, right? Because
Yeah.
of the amount of money that is in there, because of semi-religious ideas about freedom and gun.
Oh my
That
God.
it was very jarring to do that the day after
Yeah.
this election, having in the morning had to, and again, I'd worked the election, so I was exhausted. I'd worked a
Yeah.
16, 17-hour
Yeah.
day the day before, right? Having then had to walk into a classroom that morning with a room full, as is fairly usual in my classes, a room full of students who were almost all
Yeah.
women, non-binary,
Yeah.
trans, of color,
Yeah.
immigrants,
Yeah.
right? And then to take that training, yeah,
So the
it was a
training
lot.
involves all of them having to go through like,
It was run by, again, back to police. It was run by our university's police department. It was
oh God.
online in real time. It was deeply traumatic. It basically just seemed to involve a slideshow of every single mass shooting that had ever happened in a
Oh
university.
Jesus.
And then some really not very constructive suggestions about how we should all individually be like finding plywood to block up the glass windows in our class. It was very odd, it was very, very
Oh weird.
odd. But the sense of like this feeling like something I had to sit through
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because of the wider political system in which guns are everywhere and periodic violence or the expectation of it is just
But
normal now.
but Nicola, I bet your students, that was probably old hat for them. They had probably done those trainings so
Yeah,
many
the
times.
training was not for them. The training was for faculty and
Oh
staff.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure that they have been doing that for years. Yeah, yeah.
because I,
Of course they have. Yeah.
a couple of like from 2000 onwards, I was doing my master's training, and we periodically had to like I had one professor who had just been a survivor of that shooting on the 4th of July. And my first class with her, she did a rundown of, by the way, everybody, this is the exits, this is the exits. That like she did a little active shooter thing because she had just been in that parade the year before.
Yep.
And I was like, whoa, this is creepy. But everybody else around me was like, oh yeah, we've been doing this since we were like in grade school. They'd been doing it since they were 5 years old in all their classrooms. And so they were completely unfazed by the, oh yeah, every semester we do active training shooting in our elementary schools. And that was the first time I realized my son had been doing active shooter trainings in their elementary school, like right now. They're 9 years old now. So yeah, and
And it's totally normal now, right?
yes,
For them to not be that distant.
right,
At least two, maybe now three university shootings in the last decade or so where
yeah,
I've known people in the room who are on lockdown, right? Like
oof, yeah.
it's not distant, right? And it's very real.
So
Um,
I do want to get to your experience of being a
mm,
poll worker, but I think this is a really good segue to talking about something that happened this week, if you're up for it, about the assassination of this CEO of the
mhm.
um, the CEO of the healthcare company, because I think the reaction to that online has been really, really interesting, where people have basically been kind of on the side of the guy who assassinated in the middle of the street this head of the CEO of this healthcare company. And I think thinking about that in conjunction with, for instance, the assassination attempt of Trump, I think there were two, right, and I've been thinking about that as how these kind of like lone wolf acts of individual violence have kind of become part of the political landscape, in a sense, in the US in recent years, as opposed to something like protest movements, and how people's response to them is maybe. I've been somewhat surprised by how these are seen as legible political acts of kind of like, well, they have brought these big topics into public debate in what are essentially acts of terrorism.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. To see that response.
Mm-mm.
I find also the response as somebody who, as an archaeologist, studies processes and the aftermath of political collapse
Yes,
in the
yeah.
deep past. I'm
Interesting, yeah.
also really struck by some of the narrative I have seen around folks, and again, not folks who are necessarily celebrating an act of
Absolutely,
violence,
yeah.
but folks who are sort of, connecting it to
Yeah,
this kind of broader acts of violence on millions and millions,
absolutely.
right? This sort of, well, this is the beginning, right? That this
Right,
is, and I find that really, really interesting. This kind of, well, all these other sort of economic elites
yeah,
should be mindful, right? That this is,
right,
that the system is going to start falling down this way.
yeah.
And again, as somebody who studies the sort of lingerie
Yes, yeah, yeah.
of systems falling apart, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to me because, I look at it from the sort of end point, and it's really interesting to see people sort of articulating this as the beginning of that.
Fascinating. Yeah,
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 no,
yeah.
I agree, Mary. I've been really, really interested by the sort of discourse around it.
Mm,
And as I said earlier, one of the things that I'm in response to kind of my overall reaction to the election and my
mm.
thoughts on whether I even care why people made this choice at this point, um, kind of like think, I'm not sure kind of how I think about these acts of violence,
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I see them as acts of violence. I don't think they should happen, but I also entirely understand.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking back to a conversation I had a couple of weeks back with one of my guests from the Philippines who was talking about how often the narrative in the Philippines is that the reason their revolution so often failed is because historically, like apparently this is always the narrative in like historical dramas and historical novels and so on, is Filipinos are too attached to their family. Like Filipinos love
Mm.
their family so much, they're never prepared to make personal sacrifice for the nation. Like if it comes to it, like, and the choice is sacrifice yourself for the nation or like stay home with your family, Filipinos will always choose stay home with your family. And like like so
Interesting.
they never had like the French Revolution, they never rose up and defended the nation because they kind of love their kids too much. And this apparently is like framed as like the great tragedy of the Filipino nations. And then we were
Fascinating.
discussing in our conversation, like, I don't know, that sounds kind of good. Like that sounds pretty humane. But there's like I've been thinking about that recently in terms of like, in a sense, the idea of violence is necessary to overcome evil. Um, and revolutions have to be violent in order to overcome greater systemic violence is a really complicated one when you actually see it happening in front of you. And I think that's maybe what's playing out here with some of the squeamishness of like, how do we respond to seeing this kind of thing actually happen? Like, how do people actually stomach
Well,
seeing
I think it
violence play out?
also, Mary, comes back to where we talked about earlier, right? The sort
Yeah.
of the different levels. I
Oh,
mean,
totally.
I'm thinking about if there was an act of political violence in my local
Oh,
city,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That how that would manifest would be so different, right?
100%.
Because of this sort of like distance, because it's again, it's
Yeah.
performance, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's
It's performance. Yeah.
if it's something that you literally consume as entertainment through a screen, then that distance affords you a different kind of,
Yeah.
what is an appropriate emotional response, I guess.
Indeed. 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 I'm find your analysis of it in terms of the longue durée really interesting, though. I think that's
Well, I've also been interested by it because, again, in my sort of scholarship life, I have in part at the sort of urging of some other like more junior scholars been sort of sometimes rephrasing or rethinking the processes that I look at in the past as a form of liberation, right? You know, as which I think you were kind of referring to there.
Yeah.
And I think that is entirely how this is being, you know, the sort of more, again, not necessarily celebratory, but the more we don't really care that there's what happened, right? That again, because it's being understood as a form of liberation, a path towards liberation or rejection of particularly the economic system, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just come at a very interesting time when I have been starting to more intentionally think about like the communities of the past that I study in ways that I think often did sort of like make space for that, but like wasn't really intentionally framed that way. So yeah, it's just been really interesting. You know, it's one of those things where like what you think about on these kind of intellectual like abstract levels, like comes
lines up with what's happening on the ground. Fascinating.
Which happens a lot if you study sociopolitical fragmentation, but is particularly
shockingly
relevant right now.
As the sociopolitical is fragmenting. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about what usually what I do here is ask, what is it like to vote in your country? But I did write a blog post after I had voted in Illinois, and far more interestingly, I want to know what it was like to be a poll worker in Georgia. So tell me about how you ended up doing that and then what it was like.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I've done it for a couple of years. This isn't the first time I've done it. I have really good friends here who do it. A couple, and they had been encouraging me to do this for a long time. I very much, you know, think it's a good thing. Especially where I live. I had been really resistant to doing it and reluctant because of being when I open my mouth, I'm obviously not from here. And I really just didn't want to deal with that. You know, of being obviously a foreigner, participating in this sort of process of actually facilitating the democratic process.
Well,
right?
First of all, quickly, for people who don't know much about maybe the US or about Georgia, tell us a little bit about Georgia.
So Georgia has sometimes in recent years been described as a purple state. It has at a state level Republican governor. The Republicans very much control state level politics. Atlanta is, you know, has part of its historical trajectory is very, very important city in terms of the civil rights movement in this country. The city and the county, Atlanta's a bit weird because it actually stretches across two counties, but the sort of metro Atlanta counties, for the most part, kind of vote Democrat. Although there are absolutely pockets of Atlanta that are wealthier and traditionally voted Republican and so forth, right? And then there are other pockets across Georgia, metropolitan pockets across Georgia that tend to vote Republican. Sorry, vote Democrat, right? So it's very much one of those state maps where you have the sort of urban kind of blue pockets, and right, it's very much that. And it was very important. And the first election I worked in was the Senate runoff in 2022, where it was going to really affect the balance of the US Senate, right? So that was the first one I worked in, and again, Georgia was important because it could have gone either way. It could have gone blue. Georgia is also the state that was one of the states that some Republicans have claimed extensive voter fraud, etc. From 2020, right? And the county that I vote in, the county I live in, the county I work as a poll worker in, is Fulton, which is the one of Trump's notorious find me 11,000 votes, right?
Right.
So it's
Which
a really
is,
interesting place. And it's also, well, so he asked out of the state rather. But Fulton is the county where 2 election workers were
yes.
incredibly hounded by Rudy Giuliani and other
Yeah.
folks, right? And
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
currently still working through the court system.
Yeah.
So it is a county that has been particularly prominent in
Yeah.
the last few years, in a state that has been, etc., right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that did finally push me to say, okay, well, maybe I should volunteer to do this, was the harassment
Yeah.
that election workers had received.
Yeah.
Again, this, Fulton, particularly the parts of Fulton County that I live in,
Yeah.
are overwhelmingly African American in
Yeah.
terms of their voter makeup.
Yeah.
If you go to vote in this county, or at least where I tend to go to vote in this county, overwhelmingly the people working the elections
Yeah.
are older African American women. That's who, and that's partly about, the having the flexibility around work. It often is retirees who do this work,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
But also the sort of racial demographics of who shows up and does this work are quite stark.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think I know that there were, I'm fairly sure that there were other people who were sort of like, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to also step up. So I decided, I would like, that I was in a very privileged position that I could put aside my concerns about being a foreigner, right?
Yes.
So I've done it
yes.
for a few years. I don't know how many elections are, maybe 5 now. And this is the other thing that's been really interesting about being election workers. You realize how many elections there are. Not only are there all these levels of government,
there
are also many, many, many elections.
Huh. And once you sign up, you're signing up to do all of them, basically.
No.
Okay.
So Georgia does have early voting. So there's a
Okay.
whole group of people who sign up to work early voting, and then there's people like myself who have permanent full-time job commitments, so only work like election day. No, I think you have to sign up for each election. Again, I work closely with friends of mine, so I actually I don't work in the precinct that I vote in, for instance, right? I work in actually a very different part of Atlanta. It is a really long day. Everybody be nice to your poll workers when you vote, because it varies from state to state, but in Georgia you have to be at the location at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Ooh.
And you are, if you're lucky, done at like 8 or 9 p.m. at night.
Wow.
It is a very, very long day. Please always be nice to your poll workers. I really like doing it. I find it a very hopeful experience.
Interesting.
I like the fact that, and it really sounds, I think it sounds very counterintuitive, but despite the fact that there are undoubtedly people in a polling location who coming through, right, to vote, who have very different political leanings than my own, that really does all go out the window, right? It's supposed to, and it really genuinely does. And everybody who I've ever participated in this process with is genuinely focused on making sure everybody votes. Everybody who has, who is legally allowed to vote can vote, right? I'm very fortunate again in that the specific team shifts a little bit each time, but it is overwhelmingly a really good team to work with. It is a very joyful experience.
Interesting.
And I don't know if every team does this, but if somebody comes in and makes it known that they are a first-time voter, the entire room applauds them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's like that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy doing it.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah.
And I also, the other thing beyond just like that this feels like a good thing is in again, in a state where elections have been politicized at a national level, and in a state where people have all these kind of conspiracy-driven, concerns about voting machines and, votes being stolen, to actually understand how the process works,
tell me
and
about
to
that.
really be well versed
Yeah,
in
yeah,
all of the checks and balances,
yeah,
I
yeah.
find really powerful information to have.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
both, and this will happen frequently, right? A voter will maybe express their concern
Interesting.
and to know whether myself or somebody else, right, to be able to sort of very confidently and honestly
Mm, mm, mm.
say that there are so many
Mm,
checks and
mm, mm.
balances, right? Or also, just in my regular daily life to like
Mm,
actually. So
mm.
I do not think we should go to a system, say in Peru, where poll workers are selected in the same way jurors, like I don't think it should be like that system where you are called upon and you have to do it, which is how
Why
it works.
why not? Why not?
I still, because in the same way that I don't feel like voting should be mandatory, I still think that there should be the choice to not
Okay.
participate in the system, and one should not be penalized for choosing not to participate in the system.
Hmm.
I still think everyone should do it, right?
Mm,
Of their
mm.
own volition and choice.
Well, what in the so I thought you were about to say that people shouldn't be chosen to be a poll worker because they wouldn't have the knowledge. Why do
No,
you
no,
think?
no. I think so.
Yeah.
The comparison I would use is in Peru, right? Where
Yeah,
in
you
this,
have to
like
vote.
you are randomly selected in the same
Yeah,
way you
yeah,
would,
yeah.
right? And I don't, and you have to do it. And I don't
Exactly.
think you should be obliged to do it,
Right, right, right.
right? That's why I would not. That's why I wouldn't want to see that system brought
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah.
I still think it should be voluntary and a choice
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
contribute to the process,
Yeah.
but I still think everyone should do it, right?
Right,
Like,
right, right.
because you
It's
just
a good
like,
experience.
it's a
Yes,
good
yes.
experience and you learn a lot. Yeah, I really like doing it. Yeah,
It would be interesting for people who are skeptical of it to do it. Yeah, maybe.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Even if they'd be a pain in the ass to work with.
they would learn so much,
Yes.
right?
Well, I'm
Yeah.
interested what kind of questions people who are skeptical or who have maybe more conspiratorial views, what kind of questions
Mhm.
they ask about the voting.
People are very, so Georgia has, and again, this is where it's really interesting because it's a
Yeah, yeah,
different, like different states do it differently, different
yeah.
counties do. It's all organized at the county level.
So there's a lot of variety in how the
So
different
there's,
voting
yeah,
machines work and how different voting systems work. Yeah, yeah.
there has been all this kind of discussion for
Mm-hmm,
several years
mm.
now about the machines changing your vote, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So the way they've handled it here in Georgia is, you make your selection on a machine
Mm.
and it prints out your ballot, right?
Right, right.
And then you scan that.
That's what happened in Illinois. That's what happened when I voted. Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to do as a poll worker is ask every single, I tend to work by the scanner. I like working by the
Yes.
scanner because you
Yeah.
see every single voter.
Yes.
And also it's the moment when you actually cast your vote. So
Yes.
I think it's
Yes.
like the kind of excitable, like this is like
Yes.
I'm actually like
Da, da,
participating,
da.
right? So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
like that part. So I tend to wear that. But one of the things you have to ask every single voter is, have you reviewed your printed ballot,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And all of those ballots are kept,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And actually
Yeah.
in Fulton they have done full recounts because of all of
The
the,
exactly.
right? And they are always consistently
Yeah.
like they're not wildly off, right? They are
Right.
correct.
Right. Right.
So people have concerns about their vote being changed. People have their concerns about their printed ballot being anonymous, which is always really interesting because they're
Yeah.
like, and I've people are worried that even though the total number of ballots might look like count might be the same,
Yeah.
but they will often say, but you can't like trace my ballot back to me.
Yeah.
To which, but your vote's anonymous,
Right.
right? You don't
Right.
want them anyway, right? But people seem to have a concern about that, right?
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. How do you know my ballot is my ballot, but we're not meant to know
Yeah.
your ballot
But
is
we're
your
not meant
ballot?
to, right? And so
Yeah.
I think somehow, like in all of the ridiculousness
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
has like just like all the misconceptions and misunderstandings that are out there, is that it's almost eroded some of our basic like
Idea.
parameters about how like the voting should be anonymous, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is really interesting to me that like
I think it's it's having that paper, like if you see the electronic voting machine as just a thing that's writing out your votes that then produces a paper ballot, and then the second machine is just counting all of the things, but it's still keeping the paper ballot that can then be recounted by hand if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
That does make it more there's still something physical and tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That does make it more
it
trustworthy
does. Yeah, I
in a
think
sense. Yeah, yeah.
it does seem to. And, the sort of
It
the
reduces the black box, right? It reduces it's just going into the ether.
and I think there's something interesting about the very box, right? So
Yes.
again, I don't know if it's the same in Illinois, but here it's scanned,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ballot, and then it physically drops into a box, and you can hear it, right? You can
That's
hear the
really
paper
interesting.
fall
Yes,
in, and I think
yes.
there's something very important
About
because
hearing
you
it.
can see it on the scan. The scanner says, oh,
Yes.
like it ticks up the number, right? But see, I will often say, like, just wait. It's like 8 seconds or something it takes
Yeah.
to scan, right? Just wait a moment and you will hear it drop into the ballot
Right,
box, right?
right,
And
right.
that does seem to be important,
It
right?
is. These things are
Like people, like
important.
the
Yeah.
sort of physical to both the paper, but also the auditory
Mm.
experience
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
really, yeah.
That makes so much sense though, because it people do need that tangibility, right?
Hmm.
Um, I've been like all of these different systems I've been studying, there's there's always this tangible aspect that people focus on, like whether it's it has to be a very specific pencil, you have to have a stamp, there's something about having the tangible thing that is so important, because otherwise how do you know?
Yeah.
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 um I think it's really interesting what you're saying about who it is who become the poll workers and who do all of this work. Yeah. How
And
do
it's a
people?
lot of work.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that is also really, yeah, I think that
Mm,
is not
mm,
always
mm.
understood, and that that the
Right.
ultimate day-to-day working, like on the
Mm,
ground, facilitating, making sure somebody can vote
yes.
is done by your neighbors, right?
Mm,
Like, which I
mm.
think is actually really important, right?
Totally.
It is, again, I don't actually work in the same precinct that I vote in,
Mm,
but
mm, mm.
several of the folks who work on my team are from that part of the
Yeah,
city, and
yeah.
they will recognize, like they will know people who come in, and that's important. Like voters like that.
So when those two women were being attacked on the national
Mm.
stage, what was people's response on the ground to that?
I think I can only like speak to it in terms of like general,
Yeah, yeah.
media and stuff here. I think people were pretty outraged
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because these are very, you know, regular Atlanta women.
Ordinary normal women.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they're
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
women who see all the time
Exactly.
in the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
They are the women who will show up and do this work, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I think just the outrage that these women were having to like go and testify before Congress
Right.
about being put through that because
Exactly.
they are, just like everybody's neighbors, right? Like
Exactly.
that's who does this work.
Exactly. The thankless hard work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I mean, it is hard. Like
Mm, mm,
you are
mm,
on your feet for 15, 16 hours.
mm, mm. And you're not
Um,
paid for it, presumably.
you are paid for it. It's I believe you on if you are, I believe, and I could be incorrect about this, I believe if you are already a county worker, like if you
Okay.
happen to also work and occasionally
Yeah.
that like it's just like, part. But no, if you are a volunteer, you get paid like it's like a daily rate, like
Okay. Yeah,
that
but
you
it's
get
not,
paid for. And
just not a lot. Yeah.
it's not a lot,
Yeah.
right? If I do the maths, it's like less than I get paid at my real job,
Of
sort of
course.
thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a pretty average lower middle class salary, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's
Yeah.
not like people are making huge amounts of money doing that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
For a really long day. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And again, mostly older people.
Yeah. 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 Because who else would even think to do that? I mean,
Right.
it's the kind of thing that would never occur to me.
It's fine, you should totally do it now.
Yeah. No. Right. Right.
I'm a big advocate for doing this. Like
I
I was
know.
very resistant because of being obviously foreign. And
Yes.
that has been commented on by voters many times.
Well, what do people say?
Mostly it is positive. It's kind of interesting. I have people be like, oh, yeah, we really need the help kind of thing.
Well, you know, Nicola,
Occasionally it is negative.
Nick,
Occasionally it is sort of like kind of pushing as to what my right to do this is. Yeah.
interesting. Well,
Yeah.
you know, Nicola, as you and I have discussed before, there's a big difference between having an English accent and having
Absolutely.
any
Which has
other
been
kind
inter
of foreign accent.
No,
Indeed.
I agree, Mary, but what has been interesting is it has over the last couple of years, I have got what began as purely positive, there has been
Mm,
more. Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting. So even now, people are negative about nice white European ladies. As I should say, for anyone listening to this, Nicola and I have discussed before about how we are constantly having random strangers comment on our accent and stop us in the middle of interrupt every single goddamn conversation to go, oh my God, are you from England? Which is deeply annoying. People, please don't do that. But also, it does not happen to people who don't have European accents. Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise.
So
It's a little
it's
racist.
generally much, again, absolutely no question that it is much, much, much easier to be the
Yeah.
foreigner who is a white lady. No
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
No question.
of course, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
But it has been interesting to me that like there has been this little bit more
yeah, yeah.
negativity. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, goodness, we have got through so much. This has been really amazing. Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. I always ask my last questions, and I did ask you this for the UK one as well. Um, what does democracy mean to you? What do you think that the US is a democracy? Do we live in a democracy? Having to think about that one.
I think we live in a very vulnerable
Yeah,
democracy.
yeah.
Um, there are parts of me that, and maybe this is part of cynicism, there is a part of me that is
Mm,
sort of, it's a cynicism coupled with the what I actually am interested in as a scholar, right?
yeah,
There is a
yeah,
part of me that is sort of fascinated
yeah,
by what is going to happen,
yeah, yeah.
right? How fragile is it?
Mm.
Is it reshaped? Is collapse a form of liberation? All of these
Yeah,
kinds of
all of these
questions.
questions.
Like there is a part, like the intellectual part of me is sort of intrigued.
Mm, mm.
But I also, again, I would say that, and you have a prior life as an archaeologist, Mary,
Right,
right?
right, right.
We have this very unusual long-term perspective,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And so that long-term perspective, of course, democracy isn't going to be around forever, right?
exactly.
Like no political system is.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
they all change. The experience of that changing is variable, right? But again, it's just an odd. I think it is an unusual perspective because like, of course, it's not going to be around.
right, right.
Right.
You're reminding me, I always think of the very first time I traveled, to the Americas. I traveled to Bolivia and when I first met you, actually, to do a archaeological excavation with Christine Hastoff. And having just come out of the UK, I was looking around and I just saw it was their Independence Day. And there were just all these Bolivian flags everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. Like, what? Everyone's marching around. Like, there's flags everywhere. So much nationalism. Like, what is going on? And I remember having a conversation with Christine about nationalism. And she pointed out to me as we were there studying, you know, digging up the remains of civilizations which were like what 800 years old.
Much older than that. Yeah, they were
Yeah,
formative, I think. Yeah.
formative, like empires that had lasted for 800 years.
Much,
And
much,
she
yeah,
was
really
like,
old.
Mary, you have to remember that you're coming into a country which has only had what a couple of decades of democracy. Like, of course they're going to be waving their flags. Of course they're going to be celebrating independence. Like, what are you? don't be so arrogant coming from the UK. But she also reminded me, like, think about the US. The US is a tiny empire. The US's empire has only lasted, what, 100 years? Of course, they're going to be waving flags all over the place. And that, has always struck with me. Like, the US has only existed as a democracy for a very short amount of time. It's only existed as an empire, because the US is an empire, for like less than 100 years. Of course, it's bombastic, but also it's very, very short. Like, think of
I mean, not, we have, of course, our past examples of short empires.
the
The
Incas.
Inca Empire, right?
Did not last very, very
it
long
was a
before it
couple of
collapsed.
centuries at most, even with our extended timelines for it.
Yeah, the Inca Empire was on the point of collapse. It was collapsing, and that's why the
yeah,
Spanish were able to
exactly.
come and take over. Like, yeah, very, very short-lived empires that build themselves up through extreme bursts of violence, collapse very, very fast. That is what we learn from archaeology. So,
It is. I mean, I would say, Mary, like my two cents would be everybody should have a historical lens to think through
yes,
the present in, right? For me, that means a historical lens of millennia, like maybe not that
yeah,
long. And
yeah.
everyone should be a poll worker.
Everyone should be a poll worker. Everyone should be an archaeologist, or at least
Yes,
study
correct.
archaeology.
At least
That is,
understand that, human societies do change,
you see, like I said the other day, I keep trying to quit archaeology, just
No,
can't
it
get
won't
away
let
from it.
you, Mary.
Thank you so, so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really, really deeply appreciate it. It's so great to catch up with you.
You too.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe, share, or even support us by going to the website www.democracyinpodcast.com. There you can find more information about the topics discussed today, as well as updates on what is coming next.